Hello, my name is Connor Steward. Thank you for joining me today for this code review of two different artifacts. One is Appointment Now, which is a scheduling application for hospitals. The other being an investment calculator written in C++. The softwares I will be using, I'm in Google for Word doc use. I'm using Android Studio for Appointment Now, and I am in Visual Studio Code for my investment calculator. So let's start with Appointment Now, and I've separated these code reviews into the various needs, the three different needs for this class. We have software engineering and design, we have algorithms, and then we have database structure and design. So let's start at the top here with Appointment Now, software engineering and design. Does the code completely and correctly implement the design? And looking back on my design documentation and the list of intended functionalities, yes, this design is correctly implemented for its intended functionalities. I have user registration, login, event management, and permissions handling. And then it is implemented correctly based on my file names and class structures. Next, does the code conform to any pertinent coding standards? Yes. So the code generally follows Java coding conventions, and that class names are in Pascal case, and methods and variables are in camel case. I do have an issue with missing comments. Just if we jump over here, obviously we can see some camel case here, and we can see Pascal case over here, and then they are commented, but a lot of them are missing details in terms of how the specific methods function and what connections are there, and some are even completely missing, like here. So commenting does need to be increased so that my code can conform to pertinent coding standards. Is the code well structured, consistent in style, and consistently formatted? Yes, it is well structured. Each activity handles a specific functionality. There's a clear separation of concerns within the modular code. So if we're going to jump back here, every piece of functionality in each piece of the UI has a separate file page associated with it, and all the actions performed within each page are contained in a class. And some utilities are even separated out into their own. An area that this code can improve is pulling some of the functionality out in separate utility files to really make the code more reusable. And that would help with maintenance and adding functionality in the future, obviously. So. Are there any uncalled for or unneeded procedures or unreachable code? No, I was really careful not to add stuff in that wasn't being utilized. So every method is utilized at least once, and many methods, especially reusable ones, are utilized multiple times. So that is something good with this piece of code. I could scroll through all those and look, but after scrolling through and looking, there was nothing like that in there. So, any leftover stubs or test routines in the code? No, I have no leftover stubs or tests within the code. I did mention that it would be best practice to keep a production and a test appointment now within my repository. As when I'm going in and adding functionality or doing maintenance, having that test case where the test cases are already built out would be particularly useful, so I don't have to rewrite tests to make sure that any of my new functionality doesn't interfere with my old functionality. So that is something I would like to do. Can any code be replaced by calls to external reusable components or library functions? I think the code could benefit from reusing some of Android's built-in components or libraries. And obviously this is going to aid me in adding complexity later if I'm not utilizing my own code, and instead I'm using pre-built libraries for functionality. And yeah, here once again I mentioned more reusable utility cases or methods could reduce my redundancy. There are some specific examples of that. Maintaining date and time functions could be utilitized, I think might be the way to say that. And then in adding some functionality, like having user permissions only look at particular appointments that they themselves have made. I'm sure I'm going to run into libraries that are going to help me a lot there, because building something like that on my own is possible, but it's bound to be a pain. I'm sure libraries exist for that. Are there any blocks of repeated code that could be condensed into a single procedure? No, not currently. Any repeated code. There's not currently any repeated code. But once again, I definitely could move some overly complex classes into separate utility cases. As some of these classes are doing a lot. For example, my add event dialog fragment here. Event listener, update label, create event from input. No, it's not that one. It might be my event display activity or my event detail activity. I basically have save, edit, and delete functions in here, and those really need to be inside of utilities, because I end up using those multiple times, and they need to be in multiple places, but instead I'm just having separate instances of them within separate classes. So that's needlessly complex, and I could really reduce the size and complexity of my code by utilizing separating some functionality into utility. Oh yeah, so any modules successfully play add event dialog fragment, there we go. Event display activity also contains several functions. Is the code clearly and adequately documented with an easy to maintain commenting style? Addressed this a little bit already, but comments vary from clear and adequate to entirely missing, or present but not detailed enough. So I need to add more comments. They need to be more detailed for sure. All of the comments that I do have that are detailed are consistent with the code that is beneath them, which is good. All the variables properly defined with meaningful, consistent, and clear names. Yes, my variables follow standardization practice and naming conventions. So event list, event adapter. Excuse me. Let's find some. We have event grid, add event button, SMS permission button, event adapter, get all events. So, event ID, these naming conventions, position, are clear and have a clear message. Do all assigned variables have proper type consistency or casting? My type consistency appears to be maintained through the code. Are there any redundant or unused variables? No obvious redundant or unused variables are present. Algorithms. So we're moving on to the second piece of class requirements, which is algorithms. So I've separated these out, and from the first one on, a lot of these could fall into multiple categories, but my top category, software engineering and design, had a lot already. So I was a little more heavy-handed with tossing stuff into algorithms and databases that maybe is perfectly essential, but I wanted there to be a relatively even spread across each of the categories, making sure we're fully addressing them. So are symbolics used rather than magic numbers constraints or string constraints? I actually have no magic numbers within this file, or within this code. Does the code avoid comparing floating point numbers for equality? I have no floating point numbers within this code, and they're not compared. Does the code systematically prevent rounding errors? While not specifically applicable to this piece of code, rounding errors should be prevented, and we'll see in my next piece of software how that's done. Does the code avoid addition and subtraction on numbers with greatly different magnitudes? I don't have any operations within this code. This is mainly software for collecting input data and presenting that same input data to the users. Are divisors tested for zeros or noise? I have no division cases within this code. Um, there might be some later in my added functionality. I don't believe there will be, but if there are, should handle it with input testing, input verification. Yeah, later on. So, does every case statement have a default? I actually don't have any switch cases within this code, but if I end up with some, ensuring that there's a default case will be vital, obviously. Are loop termination conditions obvious and invariably achievable? Yes, termination conditions are obvious and achievable within this code. Are loops, branches, and logic constructs complete, correct, and properly nested? Yes, all of the loops, branches, and logic constructs are complete, correct, and properly nested within this code. Are the most common cases tested first in if-else chains? This is not applicable in this piece of code. Are all cases covered in if, else if, or case block, including else and default clauses? Yes, but only because if else blocks are not present in this code, so another not applicable. Are indexes and subscripts properly initialized just prior to the loop? I only have 2 loops within this code. One has proper initialization, the for loop in add event dialog fragment, while the other loop does not need initialization as it iterates over a cursor object. And something to mention that I guess we'll get to later on here is that my cursor objects are not closed, so I definitely will have some bad memory leaks because I do iterate over that cursor object quite a few times in various locations. So, can any statements that are enclosed within loops be placed outside the loops? No, I do not have statements within loops that could be placed outside a loop. That would change the logic of what's happening in my single for loop there. And that does not need to happen. Does the code in the loop avoid manipulating the index variable or using it upon exit from the loop? No, I don't have manipulation of my index variable in either loop. Alrighty, we're on to database structure and design. The third point and intent of this course. Is storage use efficient? Yes, but overall there are some adjustments that can be made. Indexes can be added for holding emails and event dates. As I get a lot of these in user profiles, and then obviously the events that the individual creates, I'm going to end up with quite a lot of just loose data, and I can't have that. So I'm going to need to create indexes for those. The dates are currently stored as text, but could be in a specific date format using a Java library. SQLite and cursor objects need to be closed to prevent data leakage. I just addressed that. So both my SQLite database and the cursor objects, I need to close all of those. I haven't done any of that within this code, so that's a big hole. Are index pointers and subscripts tested against an array, record, or file bounds? Yes, the applicable pieces of code are tested against the bounds of the indexes. I don't have much of that going on, but where I do, they're tested. So, are imported data and input arguments tested for validity and completeness? I don't have any tests for validity and completeness, except that the re-enter password is checked against the password, creating a new account. Considering this app should be HIPAA compliant, if it's released, all inputs and exports will need to be validated and encrypted before the app is released to the public. That's not something I'm going to do within this enhancement, but based on the outcome of this enhancement, if this app ends up being something a lot closer to something that would be acceptable in production, I will go in and encrypt input export to make this HIPAA compliant, because anyone utilizing this for healthcare purposes is going to need that just as a legal point. Are all output variables assigned? Yes, all my output variables are assigned. Are the correct data operated on in each statement? Yes, my data within each operation is the data that should be manipulated within that operation. Is every memory allocation deallocated? No. Once again, a large issue that none of my memory is allocated is ever closed. Are timeouts and error traps used for external device accesses? No, my database and my notification feature, neither of them have error traps or timeouts, so that's something that should be added. Are file checks for existence before attempting to access them? I currently don't have files to check for existence before accessing them, but that was a piece of the upcoming enhancement. So we're going to have to add that in for sure. Are all files and devices left in the correct state upon program termination? No, that's I need to close my cursor method and fix my database in that regard. So my enhancement plan for this particular app, I wanted to do an enhancement plan for software design and engineering as well as database design and structure for this one. So this particular app will cover 2 of the course objectives. I would like to add functionality to the application appointment now that allows different logins to have different schedules present for their specific practices. This would allow a variety of practices to use the application instead of just a single one. In addition, I would like to add the ability to see patient historical data and export those in a few different formats. In addition, I will implement a few quality of life adjustments within this code, including updated and comprehensive commenting, closed states when the application is closed, timeout and error traps for database and SMS features, and input validation for any input that's going into the application. These were actually brought to my attention with this code review, and adding encrypted security tasks is something I wish to complete on my own later, as the above changes will take up more than enough time within this project. To complete the varying practice login, I'm going to need to create a new table practices with fields ID, practice name, address, and contact information. Add a foreign key practice ID to the users table to associate a user with a specific practice. Modify the events table to include a practice ID to link appointments to a specific practice. Update the login screen to identify the user's practice. Modify the schedule display screen to filter appointments based on the user's practice. Update the login mechanism to fetch the practice ID for logging in users, and modify schedule fetching logic to filter appointments based on practice ID. To make historical data available, I'm going to need to create a new patient history table, ID, with fields ID, patient ID, visit dates, notes, diagnosis, and treatment. Linking this table to existing patients via the patient ID, add a button on the patient detail screen labeled View History, and create a new screen that lists all the historical data for the selected patient. Add export buttons. I'm thinking PDF and CSV. PDF for easily viewable documentation by caregivers, and CSV for easy data transport into different systems. Create a function to fetch historical data for a patient from the patient history table, and use libraries to handle export functionality in different formats. So the code review updates, I'm going to update states into a closed format once the app closes, add timeout and error traps for external device needs, apply input validation to all available inputs, and ensure code commenting is thorough throughout my code so I can continue to enhance and adjust this application as time goes along. Database enhancements. For displaying skill in databases, I would like to enhance Appointment Now to include a more complex SQLite database that can hold a larger variety of information, send that information out, and store that information in an accessible location within the application. This will display my skills in database functionality and UI design. To enact these database changes, I'm going to need to expand the current SQLite database schema to include new tables and relationships that cover a wide variety of data, such as appointment attachments, notification history, and user roles. Create views, triggers, and indices to optimize data retrieval and ensure data integrity. Implement a data storage mechanism for saving attachments and documentation, allowing users to view and download them within the application. And design a user interface to manage these data types effectively, ensuring a user-friendly experience. My database structure needs, I'm going to need a patients table, an appointment table, an attachments table, and a notification table, all for keeping track of various patient visit needs. For data storage and UI enhancements, I would allow users to upload and view documents or images associated with an appointment, store files securely within the app's private storage or an external directory. I believe I'm going to try to use the app's private storage as long as I can lock it down. Add sections for viewing attachments and appointment history. Include insurance details and medical history fields. And show a list of past notifications within a particular user profile so that they can go back and sift through stuff if they want. Okay, we have moving on now to the second piece of software that I'll be utilizing for enhancement in this class is the investment calculator. So currently this investment calculator calculates investments with monthly deposits and without monthly deposits with a set amount of appreciation. So going through the code review, I implemented the code review in the same way as above. I think it's a good way to do it. So within software engineering and design, does the code completely and correctly implement the design? And yes, this code's relatively simple. There's not very many files within it, and those files are not particularly long. And the user needs is correctly implemented in the design for an investment calculator that handles user input, calculates monthly and yearly balances with and without deposits, and displays the results. The investment calculator and investment report are well defined, and their methods are complete complete the needed functionalities. Does the code conform to any pertinent coding standards? Once again, camel case, Pascal case, and header guards and my header files are all used properly within the code, conforming to C++ standards. Is the code well structured, consistent in style, and consistently formatted? Yes, the code is generally well structured and follows a consistent style. It is indented properly with clear separation between the header and implementation files via tag descriptions, and use the spacing of line breaks, making it readable as well. So we can jump over here. Take a look. Here's my main. So as you can see, there's just not a lot to it, but everything's indented nicely, relatively well commented, and follows consistent naming standards for C++, as well as indentation standards. Any uncalled for, unneeded procedures. All methods are called at least once, and there's no unreachable code. Are there any leftover stubs or test routines in this code? No. Can any code be replaced by calls to external reusable components or library functions? Within the current functionality, there are no places where the code would need to be replaced by standardized libraries. And I actually obviously have some, or not obviously, but I do have some classes. There's some libraries already manifested in this code. Go here. Yeah, see. CMap, IO main, and iOS stream. Are there any blocks of repeated code that could be condensed into a single procedure? I do have a repetitive piece of code for calculating yearly balances with and without deposits in investment report. I could definitely refactor this into a separate function to avoid redundancy. Any module is excessively complex and should be restructured or split into multiple routines. No, the modules are relatively simple, not excessively complex, so they don't need to be split. Is the code clearly and adequately documented with easy to maintain commenting style? Yes, I have some header comments, but more detailed comments, once again, explaining the purpose and functionality of each function would improve clarity, maintainability, as well as making additional functionality easier to add in the future. Are all comments consistent within the code? They are. The comments that are provided are consistent, but I do need more robust commenting. Are all variables properly defined with meaningful, consistent, and clear names? Yes, all of my variables are defined with meaningful names that convey their purpose well. Do all assigned variables have proper consistency or casting? Yes, all assigned variables have proper type consistency. Are there any redundant or unused variables? No, I have no redundant or unused variables. All right, moving on to algorithms, our second section for requirements in this class. Are symbolics used rather than magic numbers, constraints, or string constraints? I do have some magic numbers, like 12 for months and year. I would be best to find these as symbolic constraints instead. Does the code avoid comparing floating point numbers for equality? I don't have any floating point numbers within this code. Does the code systematically prevent rounding errors? I do. The code uses std_fix and std_set_precision2 to control the output precision, which helps prevent rounding errors. Does the code avoid additions and subtractions on numbers with greatly different magnitudes? I don't have any computations that actually have high variable in magnitude, so we're good there. Any divisors tested for zeros or noise? I don't perform any divisions within this code where a divisor could be 0, but I do have divisors in this code, so I do need to add test cases to those or input validation. Does every case statement have a default? It's not applicable in this code. Are loop termination conditions obvious and invariably achieved? Yes, loop termination conditions are clear and achievable. All loops, branches, logic constructs complete, correct, and properly nested? Yes. For loops in calculate investment and display static reports are correctly structured and nested. Those are the only loops I have in this. The most common cases tested first and if chains. The code does not have any if else chains, as the logic is handled directly within loops. Not applicable are all the cases covered in an if, else if, or case block, including else or default clauses. I don't have any of that. So not applicable. Are indexes or subscripts properly initialized just prior to the loop? Yes, I do have loop indexes properly initialized. For example, int month equals 1 and calculate investment. Can any statements that are enclosed within loops be placed outside of the loops? No, the loop statements are appropriately placed, and moving them outside would change the logic of the code. Does the code in the loop avoid manipulating the index variable or using it upon the exit loop? Yes, my index variables are only used within their respective loops. Database structure and design, our third goal for this course. Is storage use efficient? I have primitive data types appropriate to my application, and I don't have any memory-intensive operations. Are index pointers and subscripts tested against array record or file bounds? I don't have any arrays, pointers, or subscripts where bound checking is needed. Are imported data and input arguments tested for validity and completeness? Unfortunately, no. The user's inputs are read directly without validation, and validation checks here would be valuable. Are all output variables assigned? Yes, all output variables are properly assigned before they are used. Are the correct data operated on in each statement? Yes, my correct data is operated on within each statement. I don't, for memory allocation being deallocated, the code does not perform any manual memory allocation. It's all managed automatically, and this uses a really on-the-fly input-output, so memory management deallocation is not necessary. Are timeouts or error traps used for external device access? Not applicable in this code. Are files checked for existence before attempting to access them? Once again, not applicable. And are all files and devices left in the correct state? Not applicable, once again. The enhancements for this piece of software. For demonstrating my skills in data structures and algorithms, I would like to enhance files in my GitHub that calculates the investment potentials of 2 types of investing strategies to demonstrate more investment strategies. This will demonstrate my understanding of applying complex algorithms, will allow people to see the various investment opportunity outcomes. These strategies include a dividend reimbursement plan, which is an investment where the dividends are automatically reinvested into purchasing more shares. This can demonstrate the power of compounding over time and how that affects overall returns. And a high-risk, high-reward versus low-risk, low-reward strategies, comparing the outcomes of high-risk portfolios against a low-risk portfolio. This is going to illustrate the different risk profiles and potential returns of high-risk, high-reward versus low-risk, low-reward. For my dividend reinvestment plan, I'm going to need to create an input parameters for users, initial investment amounts, annual dividend, expected stock price, growth rate of the stock price, number of years that the investment is going to circulate for, and for each year, calculate the number of additional shares purchased using the dividends earned. Adjust the total number of shares and calculate the new value of the investment. Repeat the process for the entire investment period, and display year-wise data showing initial investment, dividends earned, shares purchased, total shares, and ending balance. For my high-risk, high-reward versus low-risk, low-reward strategy, I'm going to set input parameters, initial investment amounts, annual return rates for the various portfolios, the number of years. For each portfolio, simulate the annual return using normal distribution with given expected return and standard deviation. Calculate the investment's value at the end of each year for both portfolios. Display a comparative graph of the 2 portfolios over the investment period, and graphs that show the growth of each portfolio over time. Summary statistics for returns, risks, and potential loss. Code review enhancements that were found during my code review. I definitely need input validation checks to be implemented, and I need to define magic numbers and symbolic restraints. Thank you. That has been my code review video. Have a good day.